hosting this panel with these great organizations which are here in this table. Well, Fundación Flor on one hand, but we have Fabiana from Gran Chaco, who is also hosting. W20 South Africa is also hosting this event. We have the support of Impacto Verde, Inequality Movement, Red Mujeres Rurales, and those are the organizations. So we have people from all over the world. I would like to mention the importance. I don't know if all of you have seen the title of this event, but we are going to talk about financial inclusion and the intersectionality with rural women and climate change. So this is important since rural women are the least of the least included financially speaking. They have less access to credit, they have less access to loans and other financial products. In fact, they are more vulnerable because of all these disasters that are happening right now. For instance, we are traveling from Argentina and we have floods all over the country. Yeah. Most people that are affected by these climate disasters are rural women and local communities. We have seen many sad pictures with Fabiana this morning. And these women, by being women, have less access to, credits to rebuild their houses, rebuild their homes, but they don't have any credit score. They don't have any history with banks or formal institutes that provide financial services. But they need these funds the most. So that's what we are targeting today. That being said, I would like to introduce you to my panelists, and I'm going to be one by one. If we're finishing earlier, good, because we all want to celebrate and so. But first of all, I would like to introduce my first panelist, who is on my left side, which is Maria Noel. I know, I bet many of you know her, but she's the Regional Director for the Americas and the Caribbean of UN Women. She has been focusing on advocating for policies that break down financial barriers for women in Latin America and the Caribbean, ensuring their economic empowerment. So, Maria Noel.
Yes.
We are going to speak about barriers and best practices, but being you the head of the UN Women, I would like to ask you, what are the structural barriers preventing women in Latin America and the Caribbean from accessing financial products and reducing their climate vulnerability? And on the other hand, I would like to ask you, what policies or initiatives has the UN Women led to foster financial inclusion for rural women and ensure gender-responsive financial systems? All yours.
All right, thank you. How much? 3 hours I have? Because of that question?
7 minutes.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for having me here. I'm very much admiring of Fundación Flor. I think it's a very, very good foundation that is helping a lot of women. And also happy to see Gran Chaco and La Red de Mujeres Rurales. For us, it's essential to work with rural women, with indigenous population, and of course with Afro-descendant populations that in our region, they receive a lot of discrimination, unfortunately. Let me talk about 3 barriers that we believe in UN Women that are structural and that we need to address. The first is the discrimination of women to get credits. That's the first barrier. We know that is a gap of 25% more or less. Equal condition of men, equal condition of women, they are discriminated 25% more. Because they are young, because they are going to have a baby, because. And you know what? The people that approve the loans are 90% men. And unfortunately, they don't understand that women return the credit 98%. We are risk averse, so we don't like to have debts, and we are very, very good pagadora, como se dice, we pay our credit. So that's the first barrier. It's a barrier that is cultural, it's a barrier that is in the minds, in the stereotypes, and in the bias. So we need to continue working to remove bias, to remove stereotypes, and to remove the discrimination. Because the banks are losing millions of dollars because they're not including women. And the society is losing tons of jobs that they could have been created by women's entrepreneurs, you know, because they cannot scale up, because they cannot have access to credit. So that, for me, is a very important barrier that we all need to work. Private sector, international organization, government, civil society, everybody has to work on that. The second big barrier for us is the lack of understanding that women are agents of change, and that they have the creativity, the innovation to do things in technology, in science, everything, in every aspect. And in the case of the rural women, they don't even have cooperatives of credit to access. So I give you one example. If you are a young woman doing a startup of technology, you have only 2% chance to get financing from venture capitals. 2% chance. Why is it that 98% of men have more chance than women? So that is another area that we have to work. Technology, and particularly the rural women. We had a very great example in Uruguay, my country. We worked with the Ministry of Agriculture in order to create cooperatives for rural women. It was a success because they never have access to any credit. And the biggest problem that women have is that they can't have access to microcredit or micro-enterprise lending. And the problem is that when they scale up their entrepreneurship, they don't have access to credit. The banks are biased against them. And you know, there is a gap of $90 billion in order for these women to get loans. We call it the missing middle. Women that upgraded their micro lendings and they want to have 50,000, 100,000 loan, and they don't get it. So that's why, that's a second barrier, right? That you have access to microcredit immediately, but then you are in the missing middle. And this is not a cultural barrier as before. This is a real barrier. And the third point is the legal frameworks. And that's what we are working on with the central banks, to understand that they need to have credit lines. Credit lines to guarantee loans for women. It doesn't mean that they're gonna disburse those loans. It means that they can guarantee. So we are working with different central banks in order for them to understand. Now, let me tell you what UN Women is doing. In Central America, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, we have a program financed by the generosity of Luxembourg to enable the environment for financial inclusion. And doing all these things that I'm saying, working with the central banks, working with CABE, which is the Central American Economic Integration Bank that has headquarters in Honduras, in order to convince them to leverage whatever resources we put, they leverage it 10 times more. And that has helped women to have confidence that whatever they are doing in their little entrepreneur, they will have backing in financial backing. And also particularly for small entrepreneurs from the most poor area of Latin America, which is the Triángulo Norte, is where where Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras, the borders, is the most poor area because it's what we call it the corredor seco. There's no water. It's very, very difficult, and the men are very violent in that area. So that's why the migration, the top of the migration for Central America comes from that area. So we started working there in order to integrate the supply chain of the big companies. So making relationship between the small entrepreneurs and the big companies. And this is our role. This is the role of international organizations to try to link, to try to enable them to understand what is the situation. So that we do in Central America. In Chile, we have a program that is called Originarias, and we are working with indigenous women in order for them to have financial literacy. Because like all of us, we never got education in finance. I wish I had had in primary school an understanding of what is to be an entrepreneur, or what is to be producing. And these women, once you give them the training, the mentoring, they are flying, they are exporting, they are, they don't need us anymore. And this is a fantastic effort when you see them growing, when you see women understanding. And then in Costa Rica, with this I finished, we created a technological platform that is called Buy for Women. And we did it together with national institutions in order for the women to have a space, a technological space, an internet space to sell their products. They have to go through certain specification, and that program grew very, very, it's growing, not so fast, but it's growing steadily. And I've been with productoras, very, very poor areas that have lost everything in pandemic, and they are producing, I don't know, soap or velas, ¿cómo se dice? Candles, and now they are exporting. The other day she called me and said, somebody in Germany asked me for 100 candles. Mm-hmm. Can you believe it? And she is in that little town in the north. So they are discovering what is international trade, what is it that they can do to earn hard currencies as well. So those are the barriers. Some of the solutions are technological, other solutions are the network to how you relate one sector to the other, how you relate with social impact investors. There are a lot of social impact investors that need feminist organizations, NGOs organizations, and grassroots organizations in order to finance their entrepreneurs or their ideas or their solutions. So you need to understand that there are opportunities there. We need to bring them together.
And that's the topic we're
discussing
today.
So thank you so much for having me, and that's it.
Thank you, Maria Noel. We lent her few seconds more because she has to leave. But fortunately, she's a very busy woman, and it means she's doing her job. So thank you, Maria Noel. Thank you, Maria Noel. And our next panelist is Fabiana Mena, who is president of Fundación Gran Chaco, and her organization, as well as mine, Fundación Flor, are both parts of Rural Women Network. Fabiana leads Fundación Gran Chaco, as I mentioned, an organization that is dedicated to empowering rural women and indigenous women through economic and through different solutions that are tailored for these communities. And she really works closely in the Gran Chaco region. So, Fabiana, my dear Fabiana, you have to present those. If you want to, you can stand up. What are the biggest challenges faced by rural women in the Gran Chaco region, accessing financial resources, and what solutions has Fundación Gran Chaco implemented to improve economic empowerment for women in rural and indigenous communities?
Okay, thank you. Well, as we said before, this is no. I think that if we are thinking in the different difficulties, barriers that rural women are facing and must overcome to achieve financial inclusion, first we need to understand in that the territory, the context, the characteristic of social organization, the gender role that are working, and how these local organizations are organizing themselves. In my case, it's the Gran Chaco region. There is located in northern Argentina, Paraguay, Bolivia, and Brazil. It is a pretty wide territory with biodiversity, cultural diversity too, but we are facing also big challenges regarding environmental crisis and of course due to climate change. This is one of the images that Giselle was speaking about before. This is from this morning for the Pilcomayo River in the limit between Paraguay and Bolivia, Argentina and Bolivia, sorry. And as we can see, this is a flood, Pilcomayo River, and as we can see, women are at the front of climate crisis. And they are not only working to avoiding water, achieving their houses, but they are also the most affected by climate change, disproportionately affected by climate change, as this data show us. Women and girls are 14 times more likely to die in a climate event than men, and they represent 80% of victims of climate disaster. Why? Now, why it happens? Well, we have, of course, some cultural issue, but the most important barriers or causes that we identified is that women don't have access to a range of different assets, such as education, land tenure, credit, connectivity, and so on. So, regarding our own territory, what we can analyze and the three principal main barriers that we identified are isolation. Of course, we are in a rural area. This is a common problem of all rural territories. The fragmentation of social fabric is a very huge problem. So the isolation is not the physical, but it's also from a point of view of the local organization. The lack of connectivity, of course, and poverty. Poverty in the sense that women economic activity used to be low-tech, inefficient, informal, so they generate income that don't allow women to escape poverty. They maintain the status quo without allowing women to improve their way of life. So from the Fundación Gran Chaco, together with, I lost one image, but it doesn't matter. From Fundación Gran Chaco, we work and we have been building a wide network, a regional network with Paraguay, Bolivia, and Brazil, which is called the Rede Chaco, integrated by other NGO, but also private and public sector. So we try to build together these different stakeholders, a general plan that in which each organization can implement a part, but we have like a master plan with specific initiatives. We identified three of them that, in my opinion, are the most important, the pillars of our work. First, the organization, because as we have this fragmentary social fabric, we need to create association, cooperative, but we can't apply Western or European models of cooperative association. We need to create new models starting or related or with traditional cultures. We have in the Gran Chaco 33 different indigenous people, so we need to understand how is their own organization, and from that, in a bottom-up strategy, we build a more a bigger or second level or third level organization. And then, of course, training women in management, in mediation of the conflict, in leadership, and then the big challenge of the formalization. Because if we don't have formalized entrepreneurs, we can access credit or any other financial inclusion. With a strengthened local organizations, we can face the connectivity challenge, and we call meaningful connectivity, because it's not only about to bring a tower or a connection to rural area. We need, first of all, to ensure a high quality of the service, because it's not enough to connect for a WhatsApp message. We need rural women to connect with a high quality service so they can really and deeply learn or sell the products or access climate information and so on. So affordability and the maintenance of the service is one of the big challenges in the region. Based on the women organization that we built in this year, we create internet company led by women in the community, and youth, especially young people, are participating in that. So they can maintain and bring the service in the community with a much more affordable service, because it's 1 minute, okay. And also we work in co-designing new tools, because once we have the connection, we need also to achieve a strategic appropriation of because the digital transformation can be possible if we bring to the community different application or digital tools. We need to co-design together with the community these tools. And we work on it. We design an application for selling handicraft, but also to manage climate information, to an early warning system. So again, we see how strengthened organization, connectivity allow to get more resilient community. And at the end, last point, the economic autonomy. We can get really to in financial inclusion without having strengthened organization, connectivity, and good connectivity, and the manage of this service. And then, okay, we can work in the economic autonomy. Our approach is not only for each sector, but we learn from indigenous community, and we try to implement a comprehensive approach, working at the same time in different productive chain, handicraft of course, but also beekeeping, livestock, agroforestry, because in this sense we can really create an ecosystem, a business ecosystem network that we used to call more resilient, because we are following the cycle of the nature, and at the same time we are more resilient to climate change. We incorporate design, innovation, and so on. In each productive chain, it depends, of course, on the kind of production. So, I'm closing. The idea what is, with these 3 main initiatives, we could, of course, we have a lot to do, but we could implement and try and scale up a model of intervention in which we see that local women, rural women, indigenous women can manage their organization. We are achieving 150,000 people by the leadership of women, because they can build a long-term processes. For example, I put a number there. Through the women organization, we could deliver more than $3 million managed directly by local organizations. So in this case, we can show how rural women can manage their own organization, can make decisions on their own resources, and they can be part equally in the development processes and the policy building of their own territory. So we try with this panel to exchange experiences with the other region and try to see how we can scale up and and learn from each other and accelerate the processes to achieve this gender equality goal, now that we all are.
Thank
Well,
you.
yeah.
Oh, thank you, Fabiana. Thank you, Maria Noel. And I'm going to sit a little bit closer to my dear panelists. So I'm more in the middle. So, well, I mean, formalization, it's a big issue, not only in urban women, as we see in Fundación Flor, but also in rural women, as Fundación Gran Chaco just brought us. Speaking about climate change and this, this context, I would like to introduce Angelica, who has 25 years to work in environmental field. She manages the GEF Small Grants Program at UNDP as climate change program advisor. She leads the extensive portfolio. Her portfolio is in 126 countries, focusing primarily on small-scale solutions led by civil society and communities. Currently, she's also serving as a global manager for the program. So, Angelica, I would like to ask you, what are the most significant obstacles you have identified in ensuring financial access for women, especially in climate-sensitive regions? And if you can show us some models of community-based solutions that have strengthened women's climate and financial resilience.
Hi everyone. I will start maybe because we already spoke quite a lot. My colleagues spoke quite a lot about the different challenges. I will mix a little bit challenges and solutions. But first I wanted to introduce our program. Maybe some of you know, a Small Grants program has been working already for over 30 years, since the beginning of GEF, Global Environment Facility, representing a sort of community-based arm, if you want, for the Global Environmental Facility, which usually funds big projects. And we, in Small Grants program, actually implement by UNDP, but now coming forward will be implemented also by FAO, Conservation International, other agencies. This model is kind of spreading within the GEF agencies. We actually give grants directly to local communities who implement environmental projects. And we did make an effort to incorporate women specifically. It's one of our priority groups, just as indigenous people, youth, and 41 projects, as you see, were led by women. We made an effort to incorporate gender focal point in our national steering committees who decide on grants. However, evaluation deemed most of our projects being gender responsive. However, that doesn't negate the challenges, and I want to see in the next slide, you will see different descending scales, so how easy it is to make projects, to incorporate women's groups. And that's where I want to speak of challenges. So one easiest one, right, is to have a checklist for the committee approving grants. Say, okay, this is the women-led, or have a focal point in there. That's the easiest, and that's most of the projects are. Most of the programs are our country programs, which are all around the globe, 127 projects, programs now. Of course, again, indicators. Yes, we are tracking globally indicators about involvement of women. Again, that's relatively easy. You say, yes, women are involved, yes. But then, focusing and actually partnering with women organizations already is more challenging. So only 40% of the programs are actually doing that, even though we encourage that. But sometimes all these barriers we're talking about, the women-led organizations may or may not be available. And again, depends on the region. We have different cultures. We have different women. In some cultures, women are not able even to speak to anyone, right? And now, of course, our partners from Latin America, it's actually better, even though despite the violence, but women have a little bit of autonomy, but still. in terms of assessment on the project level, to see that the project from the beginning actually addresses these needs, even less. Because grantees maybe not have this capacity, it's time, it's effort, it's money, and donors are never approving of these additional expenses of capacity building and so on. Then even less, support the networking, creation of women organizations on the national level. Very important for women organizations to network, for them to being able to speak, exchange experiences. How easy it is? Difficult. How easy it is to get funding for this? Difficult. So just some examples for us as a sort of funding organization, on granting organization. Then for the country program, to have a gender mainstreaming strategy, a gender action plan, only over 20% of programs have that. Many others don't consider it important, don't have, too difficult, too many stakeholder interests. Well, different, I don't have like data to unpack this, but at the same time, so difficult. The guidance materials and so on. You need to have additional funding, additional time, additional staff for all of these things to overcome these barriers. It's easy to say, difficult to do, because these barriers don't truly exist. I'm going to give some examples of like three projects that we funded, empowering rural women. One is in rural Belize, and you can, hopefully this can be shared, and then you can click on the story, there's a link. But these are indigenous women who were trained to become solar engineers, created their own firm, own enterprise to provide solar energy to their remote communities in Belize, which is very successful, and later supported by the government of Belize as well. So it's one of the successful projects, but there are challenges also. These women obviously have a lot of responsibilities at home, and I will talk about the next one in Colombia. So for a woman to get this training, in this case to go to India, those women are older, a little bit older, and that's because also their responsibilities are a bit less. The children may be grown and so on. So women are burdened by many, many responsibilities at home, like even here, even us, you know. So everybody, but especially rural women, they tend the cattle, they're not participating in income activities also for the reasons that they have a lot of other responsibilities. And with the project, when we try to involve them, that adds to their workload. So that's another things to consider. But in this case, it was a success, and these women, mostly older women, were able to actually find the income-generating activity and raise their standing in the community. So Guardianos of Paramos, I don't know if you're familiar with Colombia. Paramos is a beautiful area with very unique high mountain area near Bogota, with the high mountain ecosystems and very special flora and fauna, which is being rapidly destroyed because Bogota is the megapolis there and requires a lot of food, and a lot of this is growing potatoes there. For some reason, I visited recently this specific project, so growing potatoes in this wonderful ecosystem and destroying the fragile flora and fauna. And then this potato business is mostly men again. It's a high income business where companies bring inputs, and then you grow potatoes, you put your labor, you give. So women at the same time are looking after children, rural women. There's not a lot of conveniences. Looking after children, cattle, house, everything. And so it was more impressive what these women that I met personally were actually getting together and on their land that belonged to their family, small land, organizing businesses such as nurseries, beekeeping, learning how to keep expenses and so on, and conduct a small business, making advertising, bee products, various creams and whatever, they were selling that. So this was very impressive. This is on top of what they have to do at home. Each of them had more than one child. Each of them had cows and look after and so on. So very impressive. So over 2,000, 2,000 people participated because it's a big ecosystem, and people also isolated, so the project also invested in bringing them together, understanding what everybody is doing within this one ecosystem, which was an amazing project, co-funded by, as you see, there's a lot of replanting, protecting water sources, green corridors, sustainable natural products. So all of this done by women. A lot of them are families like sisters-in-law, getting together, organizing little enterprise, and doing all that on top of their other things, while men sometimes go and dig potatoes or go to town and work there on construction or something else. In Burkina Faso, the same. Women, we know the access to land. In this case, women were given actually the land which was degraded, and were able to reclaim it and generate income, also without support. Okay, almost. Okay, that's the last one. Yeah, okay. So again, and look at the amazing results, the hectares of fields, preparing, doing small enterprises, shea butter, fertilizer, and so on. So these are some examples how rural women can do what they can do. One is it's the end. So one last thing, the funding, and I want to say for all of this we need funding. And with current environment, so I want to place this question to everyone. What is your thinking when we have a discussion? Where do we get funding for this in the current environment? I am very pessimistic, and I see the funding for this kind of things shrinking, and shrinking globally. And what do we do about it? How do we, I don't know if private sector can replace all that. We need funding to mobilize these women, to get them out of this rut that they to help them, and then they can do things. But how do we get more funding here? So that's it.
That's a good question.
This one, first
Yes, Carolina.
There is Carolina, which is one of our finalist panelists, but we have a little bit more. She comes from the south, as I do. She's from Brazil, which held the last presidency in G20 and Women 20. She's representing Women 20 as well. So Carolina, she's part of the W20 Brazil delegation, and she's also part of the C20. And help me with pronouncing Geledes. Geledes, my Portuguese is not that bad. Geledes, Instituto da Mulher Negra or Black Women Institute in Brazil. So, Carolina, being part of the W20 Brazil delegation and having all these hats, in your opinion, which are the key factors in Brazil, particularly in rural, indigenous, and Black women, that restrict these women to the financial access of and the financial resources they need to develop? And you are part of the W20 Brazil delegation, so part of your job is going to give recommendations to our leaders. Which ones would you give for having more women included, financially speaking?
Thank you, Gisela. Good night, everyone here. I'm Carolina Almeida, as I have already been presented by Gisela. I'm honored to be here representing the W20 Brazil as one of its delegates. Thank you, Fundación Flor, Fundación Gran Chaco, Rural Women Network, for this initiative. I must say that I'm also International Advisor for Gender and Migration at Geledes, Black Women Institute, which is an organization that has been working for 36 years, advocating for the rights of the people of African descent, especially women and girls of African descent in Brazil. So, as you said, the W20 plays a role as an engagement group responsible for producing recommendations concerning the realities of women in all our diversity that influence key stakeholders and G20 member states. These recommendations are incorporated into the G20 communique and are intended to guide public policy development in the member countries. This is our job, as you described it. In 2024, under Brazil's presidency, the W20 established 5 priority pillars, one of which is promoting women's entrepreneurship through improved access to financing, capital, and markets. Within this pillar, I want to highlight the importance of financial inclusion as a crucial tool for strengthening the economic autonomy of women in all our diversity, with special attention to the racialized, rural, and indigenous women. However, access to financing remains a significant challenge for these women. In Brazil, racialized women face institutional barriers that restrict their ability to access credit, including lack of collateral, bureaucratic requirements that discard their productive activities, and a chronic shortage on financial education programs tailored to their realities and abilities. This financial exclusion is deeply tied to historical processes of racial and territorial marginalization that persist to this day. Therefore, when we talk about financial equity, we cannot ignore the specific needs and realities of this population. Another important point is understanding that the impact of climate change further exacerbates this situation. In Brazil, regions most vulnerable to climate disasters are often home to traditional quilombola communities and indigenous populations. During environmental crises, women in these communities are disproportionately affected, not merely due to lack of access to climate information or technology, but primarily because these areas have been historically deprived of essential infrastructure. This absence of public investment leaves communities without adequate roads, sewage systems, safe housing, and access to emergency response mechanisms, making them more vulnerable to disastrous strike. So, the climate emergency leads us to an unavoidable conclusion. Climate justice cannot be achieved without gender and racial justice. And the reverse is always also true. Gender and racial justice cannot be achieved without climate justice. Environmental degradation resulting from climate change disproportionately affects racialized communities, and this call for an urgent reorientation of our political institutions, economic systems, and legal frameworks. In Brazil and all through Latin America, the colonial legacies places racialized populations in conditions of permanent vulnerability. In the context of the climate emergency, this legacy is the unequal distribution of climate change-induced environmental damage. Racialized and rural communities are often the most affected and the most neglected in both state reconstruction efforts and private sector's investments. An alarming example is the so-called racial sacrifice zones, that are areas disproportionately affected by environmental degradation due to discriminatory practices and unjust environmental policies. These zones are frequently located near industrial pollution sources, toxic waste sites, or regions exposed to intense mining and deforestation. Consequently, these communities often lack the economic and political resources needed to resist or legally challenge these harmful policies, perpetuating cycles of poverty and health crises that increase their vulnerability to climate disasters. Well, that being said, the W20 Brazil has identified some key strategies to address the critical challenges faced by rural, indigenous and racialized women in accessing financing. I want to highlight three. I have many, but I want to highlight three in here. The first is equitable tax incentives. Developing fiscal incentives especially designed to attract investors to projects led by racialized and rural women or initiatives that promote climate resilience. This is crucial to overcoming the investment gap that excludes women's initiatives, particularly those that operate in rural, indigenous, or low-income African descent communities. By rewarding these investments, fiscal incentives can create sustainable growth and long-term financial independence for this marginalized community. My time is almost up, but it helps.
You have
Okay.
a few seconds.
So the second recommendation is alternative credit scoring models. Traditional credit models fail to account for the realities of racialized women in economic participation, which often relies on informal markets and community-driven initiatives. Alternative models must incorporate social indicators, leadership roles within communities, and informal economic activities to assess creditworthiness accurately. Such approach would recognize the resilience and productivity of these women, ensuring their access to credit is no longer restricted by exclusionary systems. And the third one is something that the panel has already brought up, which is the financial literacy programs. Racialized women who are rural women face additional challenges accessing financial tools due to the limited exposure to formal banking systems. The W20 Brazil advocates for tailored financial literacy programs that equip these women with the skills to navigate financial institutions, improve creditworthiness, and leverage available financing opportunities. Expanding such programs ensure these women can take advantage of economic opportunities on equal terms. And I just want to share 4 brief recommendations on climate change adaptation as a further step to advance on climate resilience. We need to differentiate recognition. We need differentiated recognition on climate impacts. Climate change consequences are not equal for everyone. Race and gender significantly influence these impacts. Effective data collection and analysis that disaggregate information by race and gender are essential to designing appropriate public policies. The second recommendation is integration of race and gender in adaptation plans. National adaptation and disaster prevention plans must include indigenous women and women of African descent as essential agents of change. They must have full access to the resources needed for implementing recovery actions and disaster resilience strategies. The third one is my favorite, is valuing traditional knowledge. Overcoming institutional racism requires acknowledging the value of traditional knowledge, maintained and developed by indigenous women and women of African descent. This expertise, especially in climate adaptation governance and agriculture, offers invaluable insights and innovative solutions drawn from lived territorial experiences. And the fourth, Angelica said it as well, if I understood correctly, is funding for climate adaptation. Public and private capital must be strategically allocated to promote climate adaptation efforts, ensuring these resources are accessible to racialized women. And this requires simplifying funding application processes, enhancing outreach efforts, and providing capacity building programs to ensure these groups have the tool to access the support they deserve. We believe that by adopting this recommendation, we can foster inclusive economic empowerment, strengthen marginalized community, and promote racial and gender equity within the G20 and within the G20 South Africa this year. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
You know what I like the most about this panel is that we have really, really concrete actions from the bottom to the top, from multilateral organizations to the communities. And I loved the keywords that you mentioned because they really resonate on what we do at Fundación Flora and as well at the W20 delegation as well. You know, to have different, to access to collaterals, to have financial literacy, and in underserved communities is a must. And of course, as Angelica was mentioning, community financial driven programs are not only enhancing economic stability, but also they serve as a powerful tool for climate resilience. So we are almost at the end, but we have some minutes, and I would like our last member of our panel, Susan, which is kind of an objective observer. We are all part of NGOs, institutions, financial, multilateral organizations. And she has 25 years of experience in inclusive finance and women's economic empowerment and innovation development models. She's the founder of SBC Global Advisors, and she provides strategy and advisory services to the FI's nonprofits and foundation. She previously had roles at UNDP and in Africa, focusing on impact investment, clean energy, and enterprise acceleration for women. So, Susan,
Thank you.
based on what you heard and what we see during this panel, what are your conclusions, your takeaways? Before we are having a brief Q&A to know what you think, but before that, I would like to ask you, what are your takeaways from this panel?
Hi, thank you, Giselle, and thank you, audience members. A very impressive panel and quite thorough. I wouldn't say that I have conclusions, just a bit of a refresher that we started out. We were speaking about the 3 points. Maria Noel did a great job for us in setting up the 3 main barriers under which other barriers fall, which was the discrimination of women, the inability to get credit. So when I think of this sort of in the 3 pillars, how do we overcome the cultural barriers? And it sounds so derogatory to say rural women, indigenous women, women of color, black women are at the bottom of the barrel in a sense. So I really want to ask the question, what is the incentive structure? Where have we seen sustainable success? Not just the one-off. Although again, I would like to celebrate what seems to be the one-off in terms of a solar project in Belize or financial literacy. We know that when women are empowered, there's also less economic violence, less gender-based violence. We didn't really get into that. We clearly know the correlations with vulnerability to climate. When we spoke about violence, mainly in Central America and also maybe Chaco regions, I'm not sure, it's clearly a case that, at least in this US administration, there is such a hyper focus on immigration and refugees, although we know that that's a situation world over. And as soon as you improve the conditions in each of the countries, you know that the population will benefit. One of the points that Marie Noel made was what I would call the business case. She didn't really understand why, and it's more generally speaking. If there's a reason why the banks would benefit and the economy would benefit, there's so much higher productivity by including women and lending to them, not just at the microfinance level, then why does this not occur? Is it strictly the cultural bias? So then how do we overcome both situations? And again, surely there are successful examples of where lending to women, different products did occur. Was it a climate adaptation project? Was it agricultural research? Was it a debit card related to health? Was it something with education? I know that all of these organizations have various innovations, and I also, maybe I'm drifting here a bit, but I was noting that in Latin America, correct me if I'm wrong, but unlike in the US, here in North America, you've actually had several women presidents. And I didn't understand, are these women presidents, standing up for you? Now we have Claudia Sheinbaum in Mexico, right? Okay, I see eyes roll. We had Dilma Rousseff in Brazil, so she wasn't able to stand up for very long. Not her fault, perhaps. Yeah. Michelle Bachelet, Cristina Fernandez de Kirchhoff, we've got Boluarte. Anyway, it goes on, very much unlike in the US. So again, I'm just pointing this out as a posit. When you do have women leaders, they say that helps society, and that's why I return back to indigenous women, rural women. Why are they being left behind? What part of the economy do they represent, and how could we transition that? And then also, I really like Maria Noel's point that women are not given credit for their creativity, their innovation, their science. Once you enable and you sort of uplift the skills of women, women are very hard work, and we know that they have a much lower loan default. And the saying is that men work from sun to sun, women's work is never done. The women are always good at juggling tasks. In fact, we have a story in the US about why could you never trust a man to make a Thanksgiving meal? Because they don't know how to multitask, and we women are so used to it. Pat on the back here. There are certain situations, the low education, access to land, the rights, the agency, the isolation, lack of connectivity, insufficient cooperatives, all of these things, the social fragmentation. So do we pick each of these issues and take them apart? I'm also wondering, in terms of, as a consultant, that's the way I think, what's our stakeholder mapping? What's our landscape study? Who has funded activities and for which purposes? So we know that there's Pro Mujer, Mi Banco, Women's World Banking, MasterCard Center for Inclusive Finance has the Strive Entrepreneurship Program. On the financial side, you have IDB, FMO, IFC. I'd like these women to speak about solutions that they favor, maybe sustainable, where they see inroads. And when I think about Angelica, I really appreciated all the examples you gave, because that to me speaks to women's creativity and innovation. And I was here writing all these bullet points. If I had this slide, I would have X'd. Why is it that it is such a low percent? And what do you think we could do? Who would fund? Who would be willing or incentivized? Okay, right, the big question, sustainably to make the difference. So I think I'm asking more questions than I am answering. And I also know from the Fundación Gran Chaco website that I saw, and also for GEF, there's private sector founders. When we speak about connectivity and ICT, well, that's an issue world over, especially for rural women and rural areas, period. But is it Samsung that's going to fund it? Is it, just Jeff Bezos? Is it, who exactly? Who is going to, and where is the interest in Facebook? Is it Starlink? Anyway, I'll leave those more provocative questions. So we raised so many interesting points, and it looks like the panelists, and I'm sure those of you in the audience have much to say. Thank you.
You were straight to the point. I like the conclusions and the takeaways you made, because when we include women and we include the less included that we were discussing today, rural women, indigenous women, black women, etc. The sky is the limit. We have everything to grow. We have a lot to grow.
Everybody's having the CSW at 7:40. The meeting should be breaking up. Try to get the meeting rooms empty by 8 o'clock. Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you. I just have to say, that was a man's voice.
Yeah, we are mansplaining in this very room. Yeah, we have to leave in a couple of minutes. So, identifying the key financial barriers was one part of this panel, and thinking about innovative solution was another part that we have learned either from the initiatives that Angelica brought us, Fabiana, Carolina, well, Susan, she really summed them up very well. But I would like to know if we have any question from the audience. We have 2 hands, so would you like to?
Quick question. I was very interested. Your projects are amazing. Did anyone apply for carbon credits for any of those? Because that's a financing tool.
Not yet. We are working on that because we need. It's always the same challenge. Now we need to reinforce the local organization. They in the Gran Chaco region, at least in Argentina, indigenous people own their own land. So we have an opportunity there. They have the most important forest in their own land. So, but we need to train them and develop with them a method to measure the carbon that they are saving, you know. We think that we have a big opportunity. We are discussing this intervention with different stakeholders, with private sector, and we are looking for implement a first pilot because in the management of their own native forest by indigenous community related with digital transformation, because we need local communities to manage, you know, they must demonstrate and report how much carbon they are saving. So I think it's a very big opportunity, but we need to work together with the stakeholders to see how to implement it.
Because the project, the women who did the solar project, seems like that would have been
Yeah, well, I have experience, not these projects, but we have experience supporting community-based RED projects, which was the RED regiment for carbon trading. But as you know, carbon trading is quite difficult, and right now it's only voluntarily, and basically it's kind of like a charity. So you have to see how much you measure. There's no global regimen or anything like that. So for RED, there was an attempt to do global regiment, which didn't fully materialize, and also country regiment. So in Paraguay and Panama, we worked with the communities, and in fact, communities at first did not accept that because they were worried about being driven out of the land and so on. So we have to work with that, and we actually worked with the communities to participate in this national regimen. And it was successful, but you have to work, again, you have to have additional funding to work with it, which was provided through our program, to work with the communities, to help them to participate, also to understand what it means, to stop being worried. And they were, like, one of them was first indigenous community in Paraguay, first time even receiving funding directly, and so on. So to learn all these things, otherwise they'll be taken advantage of, or won't be able to participate even in national schemes. But now it's more like voluntary, so it's very difficult even for sophisticated people to understand where is this opportunity for carbon.
Yes, we need to create the condition for allow local community to manage the carbon market and sit in a table in an equal level with the companies. I think we can do that. So that's why I put as the first challenge to strengthen local organization, because otherwise we can't do anything. But when we do that, we see that it is a successful strategy. No? Also answering to Susan, when we can. All these women and cooperative and associations that I presented before are now seated in the decision-making table as equal, and they can impact in violence policy and health policy. But before that, we had a long process that they must have. No, it's not a quick process. It's a long-term process. Another question?
Quick question.
Yeah.
My name is Sophia Swire. I'm a gender lens and climate investor. I've spent 3.5 decades working in countries like Afghanistan and Pakistan with a focus on women, and more recently focused on the problem of climate refugees. I'm raising a fund to invest in women-led businesses across North Africa at the nexus of climate and gender, and also looking at refugees, the problem of human displacement, and now the additional problem of the shortfall in funding after the demise of USAID, the 40% cut in UK aid budgets, the 50% cut in European budgets. Like you, I believe it's critically important to harness private sector investors and also private sector innovation. I think this is probably the only way we're going to close that funding gap. So my question to you is are some of the DFIs and some of the UN agencies missing a trick in the sense of looking at the potential, or not looking yet at the potential of funding blended finance solutions, first loss insurance, and maybe some of the risk mitigation insurance that are these new tools and instruments that are being developed. Because if people like me could have our downsides mitigated through insurance, I think that many more people would invest with a sort of for-profit lens, but wanting to have that measurable impact.
Who would like to take that question?
I can start, not our program specifically, but UNDP is working on this. Not enough, and again, it's still public funding on the concept called de-risking investments, right? Basically using scarce public funding to reduce risk to investments in case of renewable energy. Also with insurance, I believe we had a specific program which is now running out. I don't know all the details, but I know that insurance companies put money towards it to have like sort of agriculture, in agricultural context, to have some insurance for farmers, again, de-risk whatever investments. I don't know the results of that program. It was a pilot, I don't know, but we have a finance hub which is developing this kind of programs. I would say not enough. I don't know if it's fault of, it's not, I don't want to say it's fault of UNDP. I just want to say it's not easy. These are off beaten paths, and I think there should be more of that. But then again, the people who are developing it and this de-risking money comes from a public sector, so it would be very difficult to replace. That's my view.
Oh, it's okay. Yeah, I just had a comment which was briefly related to the carbon finance, because I looked at a project which was last mile solution using carbon finance. And it turned out, because the carbon credits are not reliably priced, because there's so much labor investment of time and challenges in measuring the impact, it ends up being time-consuming, labor-intensive, potentially resource-intensive, etc. I wanted to speak to Sophia's point, which is basically about these financial innovations or products. So you have insurance, you have guarantees, blended funds, nature-based solutions, green bonds. And then for any of these, again, I'm reminded of Angelica's slide, which was basically how many impacts have we been able to measure? Because I think it's silly to set up a financial instrument based on some kind of ESG criteria, which we know in the US is now, again, out of favor. But never mind that when we talk about the multinationals. So at least be able to measure it and at least be assured that either there's an incentive to achieve those impacts and you're not spending your entire budget trying to measure it, which is why I speak about demonstration projects. And I also speak about private sector like you, because the incentive is there for the supply chain, whether it's agricultural or other areas. And it looks like somebody else was going to speak about this, so I'll hand the mic over.
No, I just want to add to what Angelica was saying, because also in Argentina, UNDP is part of this quite innovative strategy, blending funds and capital from private sector, public sector, and also with the mercado de capitales, capital markets. We have in Latin America different experience experiences of gender bonds with the capital markets, but this with IDB in Mexico, in Peru, in Ecuador too, that are growing. But in Argentina, I think it's interesting because they are creating this strategy with different stakeholders, because we need civil society so they can identify the grassroots organization that are in this point, in this level, that they can scale up a little, creating a specific financiation for them, and then for the other scale. And so we have, for example, Pro Mujer, Sumatoria, UNDP, the banks, the capital markets. So obviously the government, the state must be present and moderate and coordinate all these stakeholders. But I think it's interesting strategy, and we should not try. I think that. Many times traditional organizations that are that used to access to traditional cooperation are like afraid a little of this new strategy. So I think we need to train and to communicate more, but there is an opportunity there.
I want to
Add up on that. Because as Fabiana mentioned, we have to build their history, their scoring, because they now have new challenges. And from Argentina as well, we have another good best practice. It's a model that only works in Argentina, but it's based on something that it was applied in Spain and a few other countries, which is the reciprocate warranty funds. They provide the collaterals. These are private companies that provide collaterals to SMEs and entrepreneurs, and these funds have the incentive to do so because they are taxes exempted. For instance, income taxes. They can deduce that amount of money they put in this fund that provide the collateral. If these entrepreneurs do not pay their loans, they can also access to the capital market, and well, this connects what with Fabiana said as well. This is one of the solutions that, for instance, in our Financial Inclusion Committee we have in Fundación Flor, we foster, and as many others. We included last year in the communique that was in Brazil about blended finance. That was one of the topics in that working group. So we have we have a quick questions because they are going to kick us. So, Lau, yes, please.
Yes, I'm from Japan, so I'm not good at English, so I saw script, and we would like to empower youth to address gender issues in rural areas. So please tell us how you have been able to empower youth and what kind of input you have encouraged them to give, not only in economy.
Did you understand what he said? No. He was asking about youth in rural areas and economic input as well as sort of empowerment. So it's very often, women and youth and in the rural areas. Did you have some suggestions?
Okay, so who wants to take that question?
We also have youth as a priority group. Again, it's on community level and rural areas. So the most successful initiative, we have also 40% of women. Also, if you count, most of them are also youth-led. About 40% are also youth-led. Not exactly the same projects, but there's overlap. We had earmarked some grant funds a couple of years ago for specifically youth, with an emphasis of jobs, green jobs and education. Because we believe that youth, we cannot just simply only advocacy. We do support the advocacy, but then young people need to build their careers and businesses. And so very interesting projects that came up it was in select countries, but like some examples were in Dominican Republic using solar energy for hydroponics and creating businesses in Togo, degraded land, giving young farmers, similar to this women example in Burkina, giving degraded land to young families so that they can start their family farming and business. In Algeria, for example, young people growing organic tomatoes for export to Europe, etc., etc. So similar, both in agriculture or in Armenia, training of young solar engineers to go to rural areas where there was demand but few people, and so on. So different focusing on jobs. So basically, that's how to work with youth with a focus on jobs and careers. And also advocacy. We also supported on a global level. We supported young people through video competition to come to the COPs, climate COPs. That was a while ago. We did for 5 years. Now there are more programs like that, but we were one of the first doing it with UNFCCC, doing just grassroots competition where people from different countries sent their videos and then rated. They were rated by their peers. And then 3 winners who were coming to the COP to be like citizen journalists. So there was like also a grant kind of supporting that. So this kind, but that's for the global level. So these are just some examples for our community.
In our case, in the Gran Chaco region, for young people, they are facing the worst situation because the local organization that are led by their parents. So it's most difficult for them to integrate this association and to create their own space, their own leadership. They are now like fighting now with the other generation to find their own place. So they are in a critical situation with alcoholism and drug addiction and violence and so on. So what we are doing is we found that as an entry point, digital transformation as a good entry point to involve them and to create within the producer organization, women and men, to create to make them more visible and to create an intergenerational dialogue so they can support and they can now bring their own capacity. Of course, the digital gap for young people is less than indigenous women, adult. So in this sense, we could involve young people in these processes that I commented before, and make them more visible, empower their new. The key issue is to create a space in which they can, feel comfortable and make their own decision now about their future.
They are going to kick us at any point. So, I would like to ask Susan as our objective observer. The UN is right across the street. So based on everything you've heard here, if you have to choose, one takeaway of all of our panelists, and these, global leaders have to include them in their community, in their document. What would you choose? What would you tell them to them? And that's how we are going to finish this panel, and everyone is going home.
Well, not a big responsibility here. And also, I just feel that each of you women really holds up your piece of the planet. I mean, what percentage of the planet are rural areas and rural women? Is it 25%, 40%? I heard a figure recently, but you'll have to remind me. So we can't move forward without bringing along rural areas in terms of what parts and percentage of the globe. And the situation of climate change is really the biggest challenge. I actually was going to say something innovations we're having now is AI. And we need to really get the data so that women and youth in rural areas are included. Digital connectivity is part of the 21st century. And so if rural areas have been left behind in the past, please make sure that in the future, this doesn't occur in terms of, going forward. It's only going to be a more exaggerated difference with AI, and we need numbers so that we can be seen.